Hi, my name is Robert Thomson and my subject topic is cyber fraud. So what is cyber fraud? Cybercrime is usually divided into two categories. Crimes specifically directed at a computer or information systems like hacking, or computer-enabled crime, which is traditional crime enabled by the use of a computer, for example, fraud, in this case, cyber fraud. Cyber fraud can include, but is not limited to credit card fraud, romance scams, identity theft and use, online loans, online sales, fake trading websites, ticketing fraud, ransomware, invoice scams, and fake bill scams. As a specific example of a cyber fraud, we could look towards something like a fake bill scam. This is where a cyber criminal sends out a large number of fake bills from, let's say, an energy supplier. They use a convincing, company template with the correct company logo and colours, and send it from a very similar email address, but perhaps with just a slight spelling change, like leaving the N off of origin at originenergy.com.au. Of course, the letter will have your correct name and address, and usually ask for more of a small amount, maybe something like $99.95. And it's the use of this convincing template, similar email address, although most people don't honestly look closely at the email address, and relatively small monetary amount works, and thousands of people pay the fake bill directly to the cyber criminal or to a money mill first, and they pass the money on to the real crook, which will be a whole nother aspect in itself. So what is the cost of cyber fraud? True losses to cybercrime as a whole is extremely hard to measure. It is even harder to break that down to losses incurred for the specific cyber fraud crime type. We do, however, have some estimates to draw upon. For example, this graphic shows the estimated overall annual cost of cybercrime to the global economy in 2013. That being $444 billion in total. Now, keeping in mind these estimates are now 5 years old, given the continued growth of internet use and increase in our dependence on technology, these figures would have surely increased also. Australia alone received 14,189 reports of cybercrime between the 1st of January 2018 and the 31st of March 2018. Of those reports, 51% were scams or fraud, and 21% were purchase or sale, both of which are types of cyber fraud. So that means that 72% of all reports of cybercrime in Australia are cyber fraud related. So if Australia represents a similar pattern of offending to other countries, and you only focused on, say, scams or fraud directly, that is still 51% of that $445 billion total. So that would be, over $223 billion a year potentially being lost as a result of cyber fraud. In comparison, comparing it to the global drug trade in 2013, the global drug trade was worth approximately $435 billion annually, according to the UN and Europol. Cybercrime as a whole now earns more money than the global drug trade, and it is increasing. Some estimates now put the global cost of cybercrime at $600 billion a year annually as of 2017. So the current responses to cyber fraud. I chose two current responses to cyber fraud. The first was the accurate recording and sharing of intelligence of cyber fraud offences. The Australian government has used a holistic approach to cybercrime by creating a national plan to combat cybercrime. One of the key initiatives of the plan was the creation of the ACORN, which stands for the Australian Cybercrime Online Reporting Network. The second response was the legislative responses to cyber fraud. Now, currently, there is no international or national legislation covering the offence of cyber fraud. Which means that international investigations require the use of mutual assistance treaty requests, which are notoriously slow and out of date. The benefits and problems with the responses. So firstly, the accurate recording and sharing of intelligence of cyber fraud offences. So this is the first and most basic response to any type of crime. Without the accurate recording of crime types, risks cannot be measured and adequate responses cannot be made. During my research, I discovered that the US systems for measuring crime have not kept pace with new developments, and only an estimated 15% of fraud victims in the US report their crimes to law enforcement. So that means that for every cybercrime that is reported in the US, there is about 6 more crimes that are not reported. So Australia, however, seems to be ahead of the curve in this response. With ACORN, the ACORN allows the public to securely report cybercrime and also helps the government to develop a clearer picture of the types of cybercrime affecting Australia, and hopefully ensures responses to those crimes are addressed as effectively as possible. Moving on to the benefits and problems with the legislative responses to cyber fraud. So the biggest or most obvious problem is that there is no national or international legislation covering cyber fraud. Currently, cyber fraud offences rely entirely on state and territory law to investigate and prosecute cyber criminals. So that means that cyber criminals committing cyber fraud are charged under traditional fraud offences. In fact, in Australia, the only piece of legislation that specifically addresses cyber fraud is Section 257B of the Tasmanian Criminal Code. Even the principal piece of legislation that covers cybercrime in Australia, the Cybercrime Act 2001, does not have specific sections covering cyber fraud. So, as you can imagine, using existing state or federal fraud legislation does not address the true nature of cyber fraud. Now, legislation also goes hand in hand with a number of issues regarding the jurisdiction of cyber criminals. For example, we could take a cyber criminal in Germany. They could be committing cyber fraud offences online in Germany, also in the UK, the US, and Australia, all over the world, in fact. German law enforcement could, investigate, arrest, and possibly prosecute under German law for German offences. But that cyber criminal could have hundreds or even thousands of more victims across the UK, US, Australia, or the world, which would not be included in their current charges or sentencing. Given the nature of cybercrime, it could be argued that cyber fraud truly is a transnational crime, but is being dealt with in a very local manner. So this brings us to future directions. So drawing on my research of my 2 nominated responses to cyber fraud, I identified future pathways that could provide practical reform. So firstly, I would recommend improving, or in some cases creating, intelligence sharing between countries to help identify types and trends in cyber fraud. As we pointed out earlier, any further information that we can provide to law enforcement or government bodies can only aid in appropriate and effective responses. Intelligence sharing at that level could lead, hopefully, to the introduction of international legislation, or perhaps an international treaty covering cyber fraud. Now, an international legislation or some sort of treaty could increase the speed and availability of evidence sharing, such as banking records and telecommunications data. At an international level, Australia is already involved in the Five Eyes project. We're sharing certain bits of information with 5 of our closest allies. Perhaps there could be an avenue that it could be explored through that in regards to a treaty or some sort of legislation covering further intelligence sharing. Some of the biggest challenges to law enforcement regarding cyber fraud is anonymity and information. And if investigators had faster access to information, such as banking records and telecommunications data, it could lead to the stripping of the anonymity away from cyber criminals, and hopefully make positive steps towards combating this type of crime. So my self-reflection. So when reflecting on my research, I can say that I learned a lot of the importance of accurate reporting of crime types. I certainly was not aware of the current lack of reporting in the United States. That certainly surprised me, to say the least. And that also led me to my recommendations of more recording and intelligence sharing. I observed a common theme throughout the material I used for my research. It indicated a strong need for a collaborative approach to fighting cybercrime. I also learnt that although the world has become more connected than ever online, sharing information and ultimately crime, cooperation between countries and especially private companies to governments is certainly lagging behind. Perhaps some sort of international legislation or treaty, as I recommended, could assist in bringing that cooperation up to speed.